Kippur War took place 51 years ago, every year pundits would proclaim that Israel could never be surprised again. Yet the events of last Shmini Atzeret disabused them of this misplaced overconfidence. This is an article of mine that was printed in the London Jewish News on the subject of the Yom Kippur War. It was entitled, Hoi Hasha'ananim B'Tzion, Woe to those at ease in Zion, from Amos chapter 6. Quote, we will found a state where matters of faith and the synagogue will once and for all be excluded from the public domain, said Theodor Herzl in 1902. With these godless words, the flawed foundations of secular Zionism and the Medinas Yisrael were laid. Israel is one of the few countries in the world where mention of the Creator has been deliberately and studiously omitted from its Declaration of Independence, its national anthem, and even its mint. The currency of the USA proclaims, "In God we trust." Of the UK, Deus Gratia, and in France, Dieu protège. This is a great kitrug against the Medina. Thus, the state of Israel fails even on a minimal level its raison d'etre. Am zu yatzati li tehilasi yisaperu, says Hashem. This nation I have created for me, that they relate my praise. Yeshaya 43. The nascent Israeli army followed the doctrine of its first advisor, the military genius General Order Wingate, hero of Burma 1944, and although he was a British non-Jew, a firm believer in the destiny of the Am Yisrael, whose motto was, Habo lahargacha haskem v'hargehu, whoever is planning to kill you, kill him first, i.e. preemptive attack. This worked brilliantly in the Six-Day War. The miracles of 1967 are too numerous to relate. However, from this amazing victory arose the myth of the new Hebrew Superman, and worship of Tzahal became akin to worship of Baal. Kochi ve'otzim yodi asali es ha'chayil hazeh. My own strength and my own prowess have wrought me this victory. Devarim 8. Also, by the folly of rushing to prevent the Arabs fleeing of their own volition from Yehuda and Shomron, a future rod for the Israelis' own back was being prepared. As it says in the Chumash, Bamidbar 33, Ve'im lo sorishu es yoshvei haaretz mipnechem, v'haya asher tosiru mehem, lesikim be'einechem v'letzninim b'tzidechem, v'tzorru eschem al haaretz asher atem yoshvim bo. If you will not drive out the inhabitants of the land from before you, then those that you let remain will be as thorns in your eyes and as prickles in your sides, and they will vex you in your own land. And it goes on further. V'haya ka'asher dimisi la'asos lahem e'eseh lachem. Moreover, I will do to you as I thought to do unto them. On the 6th of October 1973 commenced Operation Badr. Badr means spark in Arabic. A treacherous assault on Yom Kippur, even more dastardly than the Sunday attack of the Japanese on Pearl Harbor, a day that will live in infamy. The Arab build-up had been monitored weeks beforehand, and on Erev Yom Kippur, the Israeli Chief of Staff, General David Dado Elazar, pleaded with Moshe Dayan and Golda Meir to be allowed to launch a spoiling airstrike, to which she replied, "And who will be our friends if we do that?" The Arab attack was meticulously planned with bomber and Scud rocket strikes on Israel's huge Sinai air bases. Hundreds of helicopter-borne commandos were dropped far behind the Israeli lines, attacking radar and communication stations, troop concentrations, transports, fuel and ammo dumps. When properly led and with things going his way, the Arab soldier is no coward. Frog missiles were launched at the northern settlements and Celts fired at Tel Aviv, miraculously being interdicted at the last minute. Their 2,000 kilograms of explosives would have caused vastly more devastation than Saddam's paltry 200-kilogram firecracker warheads. Afterwards, senior officers admitted that, quote, it was the Avos, the patriarchs, that guarded the frontiers on Yom Kippur, not Tzahal, which was almost not present. Though one must not detract from the bravery of those Israeli soldiers who bore the brunt. The 190th Armored Brigade wiped out by a deluge of Saga missiles whilst counter-attacking the bridges over the Suez Canal. Entire squadrons of Israeli Phantoms and Skyhawks failing to return. Several hundred Israeli aircraft were shot down. The entire Israeli Mount Hermon garrison was mercilessly butchered to death in their pajamas, and the handful of hopelessly outnumbered tankists on the Golan Heights, without reserves or support, desperately attempting to hold back the 1,200 tank Syrian thrust, fighting to the death to the last round. When they had been overwhelmed, there was nothing to stop the Syrians from crossing the Bnot Yaakov bridge and fanning out into the Israeli heartland. Yet, for some unknown reason, they mysteriously stopped. As it says in Amos chapter 1, V'shibarti briach Damasek, I, Hashem, will break the bar of Damascus. Hinei Damasek Musa Me'ir V'haisa Me'i Hapala. The prophecy in Yeshaya 17, Damascus will cease from being a city and it will become a heap of ruins, is still unfulfilled. The initial onslaught took place at the height of the Musaf Avoda on Yom Kippur, when, in the time of the temple, sacrifices, korbanot, were offered up to atone for the whole of Klal Yisrael. Quote from Rabbi Baruch Horowitz, those soldiers who perished in that traumatic hour, they died as perfect tzaddikim, all sins forgiven. Compare the statement of the Belzer Rebbe, who on hearing that the Nazis had thrown his eldest son into a burning synagogue and gone to a fiery death, he exclaimed, quote, the Creator in his mercy has allowed me a share in the korbanos of his people. 2 weeks later, the tide had turned. With the Egyptian Second and Third Armies surrounded and Cairo and Damascus beckoning Israeli encirclement, the Soviets prepared to directly intervene, mobilizing 100,000 paratroops and dispatching their Black Sea fleet, as the Vilna Gaon warned, quote, if you ever hear of Russian warships crossing the Bosphorus, prepare your Shabbos vestments and await the Moshiach. On October the 23rd, 1973, the USA declared a DEFCON 3 worldwide nuclear alert. A bolt of fear was felt by many men on that day. As it says in Malachi 3, Hinei hayom bo bo'er katanur. Behold, the day is coming that will burn like an oven. Interestingly, in his work, Proof of the Accuracy of the Bible, printed in 1971, the scholar Elihu Schatz repeatedly stated that the war of Gog and Magog would commence in early 5734, based on his calculations of Daniel chapter 12. The state of Israel had and still has great potential for Kedusha. However, its advent has rendered the Arabian lands uninhabitable for Jews. It has incurred huge military expenditure, the loss of very many lives and constant peril, as well as creating animosity in the Third World and exacerbating Judophobia and anti-Semitism in the USA and elsewhere by endless embroilment in the foreign policy of the Goyim. Unfortunately, 51 years on, the humbling divine warning of 1973 has not been assimilated. 30,000 abortions at least performed in Israel annually. Ruthless Druze Mishtara itching to be ordered out of barracks to tear gas and crack open the heads of Frumme Yidden with batons, with the anti-Torah judges always zealously giving the harshest penalties against Datiyim. Quote, Koheles 3, in the courts of justice there is wickedness. The banning of kiruv workers from university campuses and army bases. The mayor of Givatayim stated, the Chosrei B'tshuva lecturers are nothing but missionaries. We will drive them from our towns. Meanwhile, the real Notzri missionaries operate untrammeled by the impotent anti-missionary law. Quote, I will never prosecute anyone under it, vowed Justice Minister Shmuel Tamir, whilst the Mormon Center, built right next to the Mount Scopus Hebrew University campus, like red meat for a lion, the increasing intermarriage with Arabs and non-Jewish volunteers on kibbutzim, Gius Benos, conscription of women, the repeated voting down of Gior Halacha, and the lethal fudging of the Mihu Yehudi issue, the raising of swine and the abomination of brazen guzzling of pork, referred to in Israel as Basar Lavan, blatant mass Sabbath profanation, drug taking in all the schools, children encouraged by their teachers to hate Judaism, the Orthodox, and even to be disloyal to their own motherland, the Israeli university academicians constantly laboring in vain to impugn the authenticity of the scriptures, the glorious opportunity of inculcating 18-year-olds with some Torah ideology during their 3 years of army service, utterly wasted. Quote, I am a person of secular values and I do not believe in God's intervention on earth, said Mordechai Bar-On, Tzahal's chief education officer. Over the years, Kofrim of this imbecilic ilk ruined 1 million observant Sephardi immigrants. The Arab enemy attacks with the cry, Allahu Akbar, whilst the poor Israeli soldier is not even taught our response, unsere Antwort, El Kabir, Year 36:5, let alone the first line of the Shema. That is to be noted, the Arabic word Allahu Akbar, God is great, actually derives from the Hebrew El Kabir, our Tanakh. The frustrating, sickening, deliberate stifling of individual initiative by the tzulachnikas of the huge Israeli governmental bureaucracy, the Histadrut, and the demonic Israeli taxation system, the daily diet of soul-destroying, demoralizing, anti-patriotic Selbsthass, self-hate from the criminal arsonists of the leftist-dominated radio and TV. The secularist Israeli right wing is not much better, and in some senses even more subversive. One might think that they were actually trying to provoke an internecine civil war, which may yet come to pass, as Zechariah 14 predicts, V'gam Yehuda tilachem b'Yerushalayim. Yehuda also will fight against Jerusalem. Leaders who disbelieve in a creator have no inhibition against betraying their own countrymen. For example, the secular Zionists who blew up the Patria ship in Haifa harbor, 1940, drowning 272 Jewish refugees, rather than see the British take them alive to Mauritius. The Palmach officer, later to become Prime Minister Yitzhak Rabin, who dutifully complied with the order to slaughter the crew of the Altalena on Tel Aviv beach in June 1948. Political assassination in Israel is not unknown. Dahan, Lord Moyne, Al-Lozorov, Bernadotte, Greenbaum, Kastner, Rabin, the death of General Al-Azhar in 1975, the Israeli chief of staff, at aged 48, just days before he was due to testify before the Agranat Commission, which would have implicated the Mapai leadership for their inaction before the 73 war, is regarded by many as highly suspicious. Already in 1938, the Jewish agency headed by Golda Meir turned down a German officer to release Jewish refugees at $250 a head, quote, because it would push Zionist activities to a secondary importance. On seeing the kosher meal that President Nixon had especially prepared for her, Golda Meir exclaimed, "This is the first kosher meal I have ever eaten." The book Perfidy is a toned-down version of what the author Ben Hecht really knew, and shows how the Zionist leaders allowed a huge number of European Jews to be destroyed when there was an opportunity to save them, and actually acted to prevent their rescue. Many events, says the Kuzari, which in and of themselves seem absurd, only take on meaning after long periods of time. Quote, "This is not the best of all possible worlds, but it is the best of all possible ways to achieve the best of all possible worlds." As the Mekubolim explain, the land of Israel was only given in order that it be cleansed and sublimated of the 7 bad midot, the 7 bad character traits of anger, greed, envy, impatience, impudence, indolence, and lust, that derived from the 7 original Canaanite nations that have their source in the Olam HaTohu. All these 7 character traits are greatly accentuated in Israel. Quote, "A person who lives in Eretz Israel must never forget its original name, Eretz Canaan, which means Hachna'ah, servitude and submission," said the Shlor. The Talmud states, "Avir de Ara Israel machkim," the heir of the land of Israel makes one wise, Bava Batra 158, to which the Satmar Rebbe pointed out, unfortunately, the Yetzer Hara in Israel also becomes wise. V'etzos Hashem darkei ish gam oivav yashlim ito, Mishlei 16. When a man's ways please Hashem, then even his enemies are made to make peace with him. Notice how soon after Menachem Begin's election in 1977, a peace treaty ensued with Egypt. He was the first Israeli prime minister to profess to being a believer, and he initially towered above his predecessors. It was Middah Keneged Middah that Anwar Sadat, the mastermind of the Yom Kippur 1973 attack, and who admitted to being an admirer of Adolf Hitler, was assassinated by his own Egyptian soldiers at a Yom Kippur War parade in 1981. Al Pnei Kol Echov Nofal, as it says about Yishmael, he will be destroyed by his own fellow Ishmaelites. Ominously, Egypt figures as a main protagonist in the future final conflict predicted in Zechariah 14, just as it did at our nation's birth 3,300 years ago. Vashalvas ksilim ta'abdem, the complacency of fools will destroy them. The 39 Iraqi scuds that slammed into Eretz HaTzvi are to be compared to the 39 lashes meted out for violating the Torah, Dvarim 25. Im Hashem lo yishmor ir, shov shokad shomer. If Hashem doesn't protect the city, then the guards are guarding it in vain, Tehillim 127. Pisom yavo hashoded aleinu. The spoiler will come suddenly upon us. Quote from the Rambam, a milchemes mitzvah is the war against the 7 nations, against Amalek, and assisting Yisrael against an enemy that attacks them. In a milchemes mitzvah, an obligatory war, everyone goes out to battle, even the bridegroom from his chamber, and even the bride from under her chuppah. Whoever plots to destroy Israel comes under the generic title of Amalek, said Rav Moshe Soloveitchik. The name Hitler has the gematria of Ha'amaleki, the Amalekite, and Saddam Hussein had the gematria of Amalek. The Zohar foretold that before the Moshiach, Israel would be ruled by descendants of the Erev Rav, the mixed multitude. Ein ben David bo ad shetachale malchus hazolom meYisrael. Ben David, the Moshiach, will not come until the contemptible government ceases from Israel. Sanhedrin 98. Quote, "You have sat too long for any good you have done. In the name of God, go." Who said that? Oliver Cromwell to the corrupt English Parliament of 1653. In the last 3 hours before the redemption, it will be as difficult to cling to one's Judaism as it is to climb a vertical wall of ice, foretold Rabbi Yisrael of Rizhin. May the wayward of the Medinas Yisrael return soon to the Eibishter before is fulfilled, as it says in Yecheskel 20, Uveiroshi mikem hamordim v'haposhim bi. I will purge out from amongst you the rebels and those that transgress against me.
Zak Baruch.